Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Club 26 member tasting. This is Building Judaea Wines of Herod the Great. We're super excited to see you all. We'll be kind of admitting a few people as they show up here. Hope you're all doing well. It's can't believe it's already December 1st. So kind of the usual format tonight. We're gonna taste through three wines tonight. As we go along, feel free to add any questions you might have in the chat, and or save them at the end till the end, and we'll save some time at the end to chat through anything about the wines or the history or just anything that happens to be on your mind tonight. So I guess without further ado, we'll kind of jump in here. This particular topic is one we've been exploring for quite some time. As you may know, Dana and I've been excavating in this part of the world for I shudder to think how many years. How many years now? It's been a long time, and
we actually knew Herod pretty well. Actually, back in the day, we
kind of feels like that.
Yeah, not to name drop, but yeah.
Yeah, and we're actually involved in some of the building projects. I think taking down some of the building projects probably, but. And then we had T over there, of course, a couple years ago with us as well. So it's a topic that's really interesting from a lot of different perspectives. The wine, the history, very controversial figure, of course. Herod was and is actually. If you had a chance to read the write-ups, you'll get some sense of that. This is one of those ones we get this a lot, but it's one of those topics that was just enormously large and complex and interesting. We had to kind of cherry pick some of the topics to go with. So I guess we'll kind of start with the first wine here. Turn it over to I think Ryan's going to tell you a little bit about this 2021 Marcel Lebnani Ahmar.
Oh, we're starting with the Marcel. All right. I thought we were starting with the Cremson. Danny, you want to
flip it
pour a
around?
Little splash there? Yeah. So starting here in Lebanon. This is a wine that is from Marcel Winery. Thanks, Dan. Actually, you can taste it.
Okay.
All good. I'll catch up.
Gotcha.
From Marcel Winery, winemaker Eddie Chaimi. I think it's Chaimi. And this is his Lebanoni line of wines. And this this whole line of wines, I should say, is actually designed to capture the beauty of Lebanon. So he is one of those winemakers who actually we've talked a little bit about Marcel wines previously when we had the Merrois, kind of the rosé, and the Marcel Winery project is essentially aiming to be one of these new producers in Lebanon that's kind of leading the charge for the new wave of Lebanese winemakers. You have a lot of winemakers who had kind of French descendants that were making wine there and planting French grapes, essentially making French wines in Lebanon. Eddie is really trying to bring back native varieties and also bringing back regions that were that have been planted to grapes since ancient times. So this is a winery from a vineyard located in the Bekaa Valley, which is a pretty well known region for wine in Lebanon. But some of his other vineyards come from vineyard sites at the tops of mountains and hills that actually as recently as about 10, 15, 20 years ago were completely unplanted to vines and are basically better known for being where some of the cedars of Lebanon are from. So he's really aiming to, again, capture this kind of the whole cultural essence of Lebanon with his winemaking. So not just focusing on like the highly productive areas, not just focusing on the areas that have been, big kind of sunny agricultural sort of areas. Some of these vineyard sites are actually they have snow. That snow falls on there. And by the way, just if you could just everyone put yourself on mute really quick, that would be great. Thanks very much. And so this wine actually is 100% Cinsault is the grape. This is a Southern French variety that is best known from Southern France, but in this style here, not quite the same like serious, maybe sometimes very wound up style that you'll see from the Languedoc or Roussillon in Southern France. This style is very fresh. It's in a liter bottle for a reason. This is a wine that is just designed to be shared, savored, and drank. It's one of those wines that I think we use this phrase a number of times in some of our past tastings, but you throw the cork into the fire. Like you're not going to be putting this wine away. If you crack it open, it's going to be gone. It's a style that has a lot of that kind of bright freshness to it. Like I said, a lot of blackberry, boysenberry sort of fruits. Something that I think is like appropriate for multiple different seasons. But it's right now. This is a great wine for some of those winter soups, stews. We were having some udon chicken noodle soup earlier. It was pairing perfectly. So a really, really fun wine.
It's great. It's great to actually see a wine like this. I mean, I think the label too. This has got to be one of the most crazy, awesome, like assemblages. I think you're saying.
Yeah. So the label is kind of a collage of Lebanese cultural icons, and so this is something where on the front you have a Nubian ibex that's actually essentially locally extinct. Ibex to Lebanon, but it's I believe there are efforts to bring it back to Lebanon and back in the highlands. You have a lot of other like really really interesting cultural icons on there. There's a couple. I think we were looking at. There's looks like a few artists, some famous paintings, some
Lebanon
famous...
National Airways. There's a small 747 up in the upper left hand corner. It's great.
So again, all this is if you look at some of the more, let's say, traditional wines from Lebanon, Chateau Moussar, for example. We love their wines, but those are very classic wines. Those are very kind of very serious European influenced wines. And Eddie here again is really aiming to cultivate this new culture of Lebanese wine. So it's definitely a little bit of mold breaking going on with these wines. And something again, this is a young wine, 2021. And I think this is a wine that youth is prized here. Not necessarily something I'd stick away in the cellar for a very long time, but something that I think is going to be drinking nicely for the next couple of years at least.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Looks
Yeah,
like the
as far
Temple
as
of Baalbek
tasting goes,
there too, probably, Ryan, huh?
Sorry, what?
That's probably the Temple of Baalbek there.
It is the Temple of Baalbek. Yeah. So actually, the vineyards are just up the. They're basically situated. Well, he has 3 vineyard sites that he works from, but they're basically kind of sandwiched between the cedars of Lebanon and the kind of the main, I should say, historic site where those cedars are, and the Temple of Baalbek. So yes, exactly. Which Jeff, you probably have a little more experience in Temple of Baalbek and knowing about it than I do. So that you're able to call that on site. So.
The other thing I think about this wine too is I tasted this wine in the summer, and I think you can also serve it slightly chilled. I don't know what you think, Ryan.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of reds you could always serve chilled. I mean, we talk about this a lot on these tastings. There's a lot of folks drink their whites too cold and their reds too warm. This is definitely something that when you look at the color, there's actually not that much extraction. The way Eddie makes this wine is, it's hand-picked, obviously, all very much kind of gentle in the vineyard. It's pulled in, and it's essentially crushed and put into concrete tanks, which is to say that it has a very kind of, not aiming to add a lot of oak or add a lot of extra tannin. And then it's just native yeast fermentation, and then it's pressed off, and then basically it goes through mallow, and like that's it. There's no extended kind of maceration. It's a very short maceration of I believe it's less than a week. And so it's actually not a wine that, has a lot of tannin, which when you have one that has a lot of tannin and you get it cold, sometimes that tannin becomes a lot more pronounced. So I don't recommend chilling too much, like a big tannic red. But this wine doesn't have that much tannin because he doesn't extract that much tannin.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like one thing I really like about Cinsault is that there's always this graphite quality on the finish, and that's kind of like a telltale sign if you ever blind tasting for Cinsault.
T, you're giving away your secrets.
Number 2 pencil lead.
T, if we hear you talking about that at the blind tasting group next time, I'm going to steal your answer.
Just for reference, anybody who's ever tasted with T will know he writes like Leonardo da Vinci. It's backwards and sideways and completely indecipherable. So these are well kept secrets that you're getting tonight. We'll post some of it online. Those are like
that's one of those.
Linear B.
Blind tasting is one of those like ESPN 6 or 7, or ESPN 8, the Ocho events that you'll see at like 3 a.m. I'm sure someday. Like the World Series of wine blind tasting. Yeah, and then you'll see T on there.
T's gonna have the shades on and the hat pulled way down. And he's just gonna be like
a poker player. Yeah.
he'd be like apricot.
You guys are picking on him because he's on his own tonight. He can't defend himself.
That's right.
Hotel room.
So there was one comment I was gonna make,
Yeah.
Cinsault is usually a blending grape. You don't see a lot of 100% Cinsault being sold. Although it's becoming more common, we're sitting here in the Lodi appellation in California, and there's a fair amount of Cinsault that's being made here as well. But in general, the reason I think it says blending grape is because it doesn't have a lot of backbone, yet this wine does. It's got pretty good structure. And
Yeah.
I don't know whether this is the climate or the winemaking or both, but it's a very nice wine. It's probably one of the best Cinsauts I've ever tasted.
Yeah, thanks for the question there. And the yes, Cinsault, well, let's jump back for a second there on the term blending grape. Blending grape is one of those things that is more historical than, let's say, physiological. There are some grapes that maybe don't predispose themselves to developing structure. And sometimes it's just more how they were used. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has anything to do physiologically with the way the grape is. For example, Malbec is a blending grape in Bordeaux. You never see it more than a few percentage in a Bordeaux blend. But of course, in Argentina, parts of California now, you're seeing Malbec produced in 100% forms all over the world. And so the concept of a blending grape, absolutely, yes, it played in the south of France, Cinsault plays a certain role. It also plays a big role in a lot of the rosé wines of southern France. But the notion that it can't develop structure, as you rightfully point out, like is actually something that for a lot of folks are kind of rediscovering these grapes, where you're having grapes that again they were relegated to blending grape status, and it's great that we have these elements of character and structure that can be brought out by where they're grown. So in the case of this vineyard here in Lebanon, definitely clay soils with a lot of limestone. There's a lot of limestone where they're at. So this is about 1,200 meters elevation. So this is not the super like snowy rocky vineyards that Eddie works with, which are up about 2,300 meters elevation where it snows. Yeah, so you do get still, again, despite the light maceration here, you're still getting a great backbone on it. And you guys are out there in Lodi. You have one of the best Cinsault vineyards in the world with Bechtold Vineyard, which is 115, 120 years old. If you're a Cinsault fan, you've probably had it from California. If not, I highly recommend everybody look for a wine made from that vineyard, because it's one of like our California heritage vineyards that really can show what the Cinsault grape can do. It's very sought after fruit. But yeah, there actually are some Cinsault single variety wines from the south of France in the Languedoc. That are around 100-year-old vineyards that are now used exclusively for single vineyard expressions, and they are dark, gnarly wines that have packed in amounts of fruit and this kind of like really, really rigid backbone to it in a great way. But they're few and far between, because a lot of those old Cinsault vines were ripped up in the 60s and 70s. So a lot of the vineyards didn't make it to be able to show off what they can do. So, but yeah, it's a great grape.
We could revisit that for our wines of the New World. We have a couple of ideas coming along the line. So
Absolutely,
good suggestions there to kind of keep exploring. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, South Africa is another spot where they're doing a lot of interesting things with Cinsault too.
That's right. Well, they crossed it with Pinot Noir to produce Pinotage, which is the kind of the famed grape of South Africa. For better or for worse, Pinotage has a pretty bad rep in some circles. To be fair, there were some pretty horrible Pinotages that were released in the 90s and 2000s. So I'm not gonna give it a full pass yet, but there are some really, really fantastic wines made from that grape, which is again a Pinot Noir and Cinsault cross. Yeah.
I have one more question on Cinsault. I know there are a lot of French grapes in general that have been brought into Lebanon, but I feel like Cinsault in particular is very highly represented in Lebanon compared to other places. I mean, Chateau Moussard in their classic red wines mixes Cinsault, of course, with Cabernet Sauvignon and Carignan. And I'm just wondering if there's a particular reason that Cinsault is so popular?
Yeah, it holds its acid well in heat,
Yeah, I was gonna
similar to Carignan. The Carignan likes a little bit more acidic soils, whereas Cinsault does better in more basic soils, so more limestone. You see Carignan, just since I mentioned it, a little like in Saint-Chinian and like a little bit more like kind of granitic and volcanic stuff. It likes that stuff better. Versus you have similar sort of limestone. Anytime you find limestone, certain grapes are just going to thrive in it. And so being able to retain some of that minerality, some of that verve that we are kind of alluding to, as well as be able to get great ripeness and good and just really good quality fruit, despite the heat. This is growing again at a little bit lower elevation than some of Eddie's other vineyards that he works with. So yeah, that honestly, when you're in this Mediterranean climate, a lot of times it's just that balance between, can you get a good harvest of good quality ripe fruit. That's actually easier to do than it is to keep your acidity and to keep your tannic structure without things getting out of whack. If you say get a really bad heat spike right around harvest time or something like that, that's usually what you're worrying about. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to throw in absolutely. And it's also sort of overall temperature resilience too, right? Because the Becca Valley can get quite cold in the wintertime. So it's the vine's ability to survive those kinds of ups and downs. And it's just it's a little bit more reliable than some other grapes. Grenache, for example, is a grape that is like notoriously finicky to climatic changes. So Grenache, if it's too cold during flowering in the spring, it likes to shatter, which means you'll get clusters that are missing like every fourth or fifth berry. Basically, if it rains too close to harvest, the berries start bursting. Grenache is just like a finicky grape to work with, and a lot of winemakers, or I should say grape growers and winemakers, hate working with it. I mean, they love the wines, but it's just a pain in the ass to work with because it rots if it gets too much moisture. It has dense clusters. Depending if it doesn't shatter, it'll have dense clusters and then it rots. It's one of those sort of things that I can imagine when they were looking at planting vineyards in Lebanon, which is again relatively like blank slate for probably a lot of vineyard areas. They're saying, okay, what's going to be our best bet for a 10-year proposition, 15-year, 30 years, 40-year proposition? And they're probably looking for reliability. And based on a lot of trial and error, right? Because we're kind of now in this zone where there's been enough failure. There's been enough, Rothschild experiments, in the Carmel Mountains, total disastrous, attempts to grow European varietals. Yeah. It's figuring out what works and then, moving from there.
Yeah, right? This vineyard is only 10 years old, so it's something that comes with a lot of knowledge behind it. They're definitely not going in blind here, as far as what they're hoping to get out of it. And I'm sure that we'll probably see some vineyards that are currently planted to, let's say, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, some varieties that are maybe better suited to a little bit cooler climates, being switched over to Southern Rhone varieties, or Languedoc varieties. Yeah.
Makes sense. And one more unrelated question too. I noticed on the wine bottle it says semi-carbonic. And I don't actually get a lot of what I associate with like that Beaujolais Nouveau-esque carbonic aromas. And I haven't had that many carbonic wines, but I was wondering how
Depends on batting times.
sort of the carbonic maceration versus traditional fermentation is in this wine.
Yeah, I was going to ask you the exact same question. I noticed the same thing. Yeah.
I hadn't cut that.
Yeah. So basically, the way Eddie makes the wine is you basically just harvest the grapes and you basically just toss it into a big tank, and you're always going to get, when you just start tossing heaps and heaps of fruit, you're going to start getting some carbonic because the fruit's just going to start fermenting at the bottom of the stack. So it's something that is probably, I would say, semi-intentional, and so it's probably one of those things that there's definitely to go fully carbonic, it can be actually a little bit difficult, and so I think that this is something that he probably has a certain percentage that he's assuming is going carbonic, but my guess is it probably changes a bit each year. But it didn't actually. So I was actually looking for the technical specs, and it didn't specify like, oh, this is 10% or 20% or 40% or something like that. But I don't get a lot of the carbonic-y sort of elements that usually you get, where you get some of those thiols, you get some of those kind of bubblegum blueberry sort of candy flavors. I don't really get that. I think the wine presents as something that would be less serious than it is, and it's actually something that kind of is like a sort of like a lighthearted picnic wine that actually is or masquerading as a lighthearted picnic wine, when really they're actually, as we've teased apart, there's more serious stuffing to this wine. Yeah,
That's a good way of putting it.
Well, Jeff, should we move on to wine number 2?
Actually, kind of following the theme, because there's a lot of interesting parallels as far as these table grapes and table wines.
Yeah, it's a really cool wine. I mean, that's just this year, right? That those wines are coming in, the Marcel wine. So it's our second one we've been able to get our hands on, and
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're people are going crazy for him, because he did a bit of a U.S. tour, and I think he sold a lot of wine just being here, and just getting these wines, because the market is definitely thirsty for newness, but also just for delicious wines like this.
yeah, sold a lot of wine to us, and
Absolutely.
thereby to you, yeah. So those of you who've been with us even for not too long will recognize this label, or at least a version of this label. So Cremazon, which is our second wine of this month's club, the 2019 Cremazon Star of Bethlehem Dabuki. This is the wine we've been working with. Speaking of excavating in the Middle East, this is the wine we've been working with for a long time.
Yep.
Dan and I had the opportunity to visit the winery in 2017.
That was 2017. I was trying to remember the date.
Yeah, so
my goodness.
yeah,
Seems
and so this may be a little bit of repeat for some of you, but this winery actually goes all the way back to 1885. It was founded by Salesian monks, and Salesian monks are an order of the Catholic Church. Last time I checked, the second largest number of priests actually in the order in the Catholic Church for a Catholic order. And they've been making wine since then in a more kind of modern style with modern equipment since the late 90s. I think it's 1997. So it's a fairly recent player as far as like kind of modern winemaking. And it's a really interesting project. These monks donate all of the proceeds from the wine sales to various projects throughout the West Bank and Israel. So educational projects and working with the poor and doing all kinds of cool stuff. And the winery is actually the first as well to experiment with a lot of these indigenous wine varieties. So Dabuki being one, and we've had our other wine that we've worked with a few times that we had in the previous club was the Star of Bethlehem Hamdani Jandali, which was a white 50-50 white blend of those two grapes, again indigenous varieties to the area. And then they have a Baladi, which is a red grape, which we haven't yet featured, but stay tuned. It may, if we find a way to work it in at some point, we will certainly do that. So really cool. This grape, the Buki, is actually there's evidence that it comes from Armenia originally, even though it's been cultivated in this area for such a long time. And that would, if you've been following our project, that would trace it back to the kind of earliest origins of wine making. So Dan, I know what the latest is, 6,000 BCE. What's the?
I think we're always pushing back.
It's always pushing back. So yeah, something like that, 6,000 BCE. Evidence of organized and intentional winemaking in the area of around Iran and Armenia, Georgia. So it's a bit of a kind of push.
Armenia and Georgia are always fighting.
Yeah, so whoever has the oldest one. So but yeah, it's a really interesting grape, like we were saying. I think kind of a neutral sort of nose to it. One of those wines you could describe as, not that it's uninteresting, but it doesn't have like a strong aromatic quality like a Sauvignon Blanc or Viognier or Chenin Blanc, something like that. Was for a long time, it was sort of a workhorse grape. Dabuki, like 80s and 90s, was used to they distilled most of it down into the local spirit there is Arak. And actually Dana, and I don't know, but I would imagine just based on what we saw at Cremazon there, where
This is the brandy grape.
the
Yeah.
brandy grape. Yeah. So we had
Yep.
we had the, I don't know if it was the pleasure or displeasure to try some of the
We didn't lose our
brandy that
vision.
they were making there. And of course the winery, you know, for a long time there, it was about 100 years, that obviously a lot of the wine they were making was sacramental wine, you know, where the standards for sort of, there weren't, you know, probably a lot of people sitting around on Zoom, picking apart the various, you know, virtues of these different wines. It was more sort of like a little sniff, little whiff, little taste at communion. So yeah, like I say, this is a pretty modern thing where they're taking these cool indigenous varieties and trying to do something really interesting with them. But yeah, the brandy is a big deal there as well. And we had I don't know what we did with that bottle. We definitely didn't finish that bottle.
I mean, the fact that we don't remember probably says everything.
Yeah, that
It's
might
just
tell you all
there.
you need to know. But yeah,
It
they were
is-
doing
it
a
is
lot of
interesting,
brandy
though.
and stuff. So that was kind of, you know, what this grape was traditionally used for. But now it's making you know, a really interesting, and again, I think a wine that once you kind of get in, presents as a pretty serious wine. So
This is kind of interesting to taste against the Hamdani Jandali, right? And
Yeah.
that actually, ever since I think it's Ricardo Cottarella came in and took over winemaking operations, I think you said it, Jeff, in '97. You know, Cremazon is really on the map now. And you know, the Hamdani Jandali, Star of Bethlehem's won a couple of awards now. This is so much. It's really interesting because, like you were just saying, Jeff. You know, I mean, this is a table grape, right? It's a grape that kind of served as this. You know, you can use the leaves for dolmas, right? It's you know, one of these basic grapes that now is finding this new role in you know, in the hands of, you know, of a fine winemaker. And I think similar to the, you know, the one we just tried, there's a simplicity to it. There's like a roundness, and it's just so pleasant to drink. I like this wine a lot.
Yeah, for me on the nose, I mean, it's you use the word neutral, Jeff, and like, yeah, that's always a word that is. It's more, again, that's more descriptive of the type of variety. Like we're talking about, like technically Chardonnay is a more neutral grape versus something that's technically classified as like an aromatic grape, which would be something like you said, like Viognier, Muscat, your Rieslings, these sorts of things. Yeah, I think a lot of times when I would use the word neutral back when I was selling wine at the wine shop, it was actually a very useful term in my mind. I wouldn't usually necessarily use it to sell wine, but for helping people find white wines that they liked, white wines that they could kind of groove with when they say, okay, I don't want anything sweet, but I need a good white wine. This is this type of wine where you have a balance between the body, the texture, the acidity, and all of these kind of, they're nice, they're pronounced, they're not like intense though. These flavors, you're getting a lot of this kind of, I get a lot of peach, you get a lot of fresh green apple, apricot, stone fruit, little kind of like white flowers, that sort of thing. But not every wine needs to be loud.
Yep.
And I think this is a good example of that, where you have a wine that's kind of like right, you know, in a very nice, balanced sort of expression of
There's
itself.
a balanced simplicity that you could have with, you know, with that acidity coming through. And you think about like, not that you maybe having them with Palestinian dishes like makhlube or like these other things, but yeah, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to comment on this wine is the color, which is sort of this orangish color. If we see that kind of color in the California wines, we say, oh, too old, you know, caramelized, don't even try to drink it.
Yep.
You know, I see this kind of color sometimes in some Northern Italian whites, but you know, the wine obviously is not over the hill or anything, but can you comment on the color of the wine?
Yeah, so like the wine that you mentioned, like Northern Italian, you'll sometimes see like almost like a Pinot Gris, or I should say Pinot Grigio, like a Ramato style, where you can kind of get those little hints of like orange or orangey pinkish sort of colors around the edges. I mean, this wine is not like a skin contact wine by design. I also noticed there's definitely a little more from my Cinsault in the glass, so that may have helped pick up a little bit on mine too. But no, it's not designed as a skin contact white. So there's definitely, you know, there's definitely a little bit of the, of that kind of, I get like, yeah, Pinot Grigio kind of elements to it. Then that Northern Italian style is more in that like light skin contact
It's
style.
it's organic and it's soft pressed straight into stainless, I think. And then
But
Yeah, it does have a pretty round, I mean, we've all kind of commented on just the roundness and the fullness of the mouthfeel. That's something I think definitely, Dana, if you put it next to that other Star of Bethlehem, you notice that contrast. That's a little bit more racy, a little bit crisper.
exactly.
And it's interesting with this one, yeah, because it doesn't see any kind of oak treatment at all. It's just it's a totally stainless steel production.
I mean, I think Northern Italian is a great call because it's a brilliant point, because I think some Northern Italian grapes like Arnaise can get that color very soon, even though it's stainless steel.
And it's young.
And it kind of has that kind of neutral-ish, slightly floral, but not Viognier level, not Sauvignon Blanc, kind of tropical notes.
It's one of these things that every time I tried, and as Jeff was saying, we crawled around those terraced vineyards for a good part of a day in the blazing heat. But the vineyard is actually quite high. It's at 2,600 feet, and they get snow.
It's snowy. Yeah,
just where we were talking about with the Becca Valley, right? Choosing these varietals, right, which have kind of stood the test of time, and Cremazon actually even comes from like this sort of doublets Kerem Zan. That's the hill of Zan. It's another local grape varietal. I mean, again, grapes have been out here, and the those that have adapted to these climates really are able to stand the test of time and then produce these wines that I'm like, you have no business being this good given all the conditions within which you're operating, right? So.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of the mindset.
Yeah. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead,
I was gonna say, Cremazon, what we really love about them is they're focusing on indigenous varieties. I mean, first of all, there's not a lot of wines from the West Bank, and if you look at a lot of Israeli wines, it's Cabernet, Chardonnay, made in a very New World style. It's very difficult to find indigenous varieties.
That's the Rothschild legacy out of Carmel. Yeah, exactly. Yep, absolutely. Although you do have actually up in like Mount Hermon and also in the Carmel, Israeli, and also Ashkelon even, some wineries that are attempting to kind of bring back some native varietals, and of course it's always political too, right? So it's very fraught, which is what this is so nice about this wine, and the fact that all the proceeds, like Jeff was saying, go towards the programs of the Salesian monks and their seminary there. So it's for a good cause.
And if I'm not mistaken, this project also, like one of their like stated I should say efforts is they have in the project they have Christian, Jewish, Muslim people of all the Abrahamic faiths, if you will, working either in vineyards, selling the wine. So it's one of those kind of like multi-faith sort of projects that's I think is kind of pretty cool for the area.
Yeah, this is just 12 kilometers outside of Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and it's actually separated by the partition wall. So the politics are front and center. So you have this combination of kind of tying back to the roots, tying back to the land, having a program that brings those people together, creating economic opportunity, helping out boys programs. So in all cases, this just checked all the boxes for us from the beginning, and it's so cool. It's my first time trying the Debuki because the Cremazon Hamdani Jandali is probably one of my favorite wines we've ever carried. So yeah, we gotta get back to
the Baladi when we were there at the winery, in addition to the brandy and the yeah.
We'll stay.
Brandy might be a loose term. Firewater. I
mean, there were two different operations, right? I mean, there's like the winery and then the brandy side, and the brandy it looked like an industrial facility for.
Yeah, it was very large scale. Huge stills and everything else, but. Yeah. So anyway, it goes back to kind of our, our earliest days of our nonprofit work, and has been with the Ancient Wine Guys project from the very beginning too. So it's always continues to be a really special winery and and all around really special kind of idea for us that there's indigenous varieties being grown in, in the West Bank, and that we have the opportunity to share them. It's really, really cool. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
well, with that, do you want to move on? Tease, we've got the third one in his hand. Let's
do it.
All right, so the third wine is the 2021 Rivero Primitivo from Salento, which is near Brindisi. Primitivo, it's probably best known as, most people probably tasted this grape as Zinfandel, especially if you're in the States. But the grape actually comes from, after DNA testing, it actually comes from Croatia originally, Tribodraj. And actually, I heard there's a producer in Croatia, Sea Wines at Diocletian, who's making 100% Tribodraj, which is, I don't think very much is actually grown in Croatia anymore. But originally it's from there, and then it migrated to southern Italy, in the Puglia region, and then Italian immigrants took this grape, took cuttings of Primitivo and planted in California, where they called it Zinfandel. So grape is best known as Zinfandel. Primitivo, the name of the grape comes from the fact that it ripens pretty early. So as we were talking earlier about Cinsault, the thing with Primitivo or Zinfandel is that if you grow it in very fertile soils in hot climates, the alcohol levels can get pretty high. You can easily get a 16-17% very jammy, high alcohol, high ABV wine. But what Rivera is trying to do is to have a more restrained version. So they harvest in early August. They age it in cement tanks instead of new French oak or oak barrels. And as a result, you get a more restrained style of Primitivo than other producers. And so there's, that classic notes of plum and sort of like a little stewed fruit, but the finish is pretty, I would say, medium. It's there's still acidity there. It's a little bit restrained. It's only 14% ABV. It's not that much higher than that, and it's just a really fun, versatile wine that you can have with barbecue, like pulled pork, like stews, etc. And it kind of, what I like about this grape is that just like the club, it kind of represents the way wines went across the Mediterranean worlds, but as wines were being traded, grapes were also moving as well.
Yeah, I think the connection to the club obviously is that Herod was drinking. They found evidence of wines that were imported from this region, right?
Yeah.
So
And Masada and Herodium.
yeah, so it's not just all things coming from the kind of like the crescents of we think about things sprouting out from the fertile crescents of the Levant and the Middle East. Like actually, like things were coming back there. Like they were importing wine into this place that there was wine there, obviously, in ancient Judea.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're the king, you can have your pick of vintages and appellations, I suppose, from the Mediterranean world.
Yeah, at Herodium, we mentioned this in the club. Yeah, it's pretty clear from the labels and from the ceramics that these wines are coming in from Italy, but also that Herod is enjoying local varietals like the one we're having too. So that's like T was just saying, it's a fantastic way of looking at that interplay, during this period of connectivity and, as you said, things leaving and then coming back, right? The reflection of it. It's really cool.
And one quick, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I mean, we know that from potsherds that were found in Masada, right? So there's actually mentions of a family we know was based in Brindisi, which is near where this wine was produced. So that's the connection. So it's kind of these, I mean, truly international variety going back 2,000 years, this idea, whether it was Primitivo or something similar, or another, at least from that region. It's pretty cool to think that, the kind of exchange of wine and wine technology, and just the culture of, the exchange of taste, what's a refined taste. Herod was he was a very noted Hellenophile, for one thing, which we'll actually be touching on in our event next week. He sponsored the Olympic Games for a while, but also
plug, Deb.
Romanophile. I know, right? So
Yeah, good.
we have a slide on it too, Dana. But
Okay.
so yeah, he was very interested in things international taste. So he visited Rome and Greece and had these kinds of, just like we might be interested in Greek wines, Italian wines. So he was as well. So yeah, sorry, Ryan, you what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was just gonna had a comment more on the the parent lineage of the wine, just kind of like the Zinfandel Primitivo connection going back, and like T mentioned, there's this kind of variety that goes back to Croatia, this Tribodrag. I've also heard it called the Churlianac Castellansky. Like there's a whole bunch of names for that you kind of see as these kind of like ancient parentages of the Zinfandel grape. The thing is that there now, when you taste wines made from these different varieties, not only are they made in different places, but there's probably been so much divergence of kind of clonal variation and different cousins that, they're not this. Technically, the DNA could be the same grape, but it's not. They don't express the same way. So, so you'll see even in California, for example, you'll see winemakers who make both a Zinfandel and a Primitivo. And some of it is, I would say, a stylistic difference where the wines can come out maybe a little bit more old world in the Primitivo style. But you can find plantings and clones and cuttings to plant a whole vineyard of Primitivo.
Yeah, they're not using the same grapes.
It's not the same like Zinfandel clones that you'll say put up in Dry Creek or Sonoma or Brock Pile or something like that. So there is enough variation now that they're definitely distinct over time. But yeah, so now I would say probably the most common way to talk about it is like they're cousins, really. Like they're close cousins. So but yeah, it's one of the most kind of like talked about and documented lineage paths, and then they got it wrong for a long time until DNA basically DNA tracing was able to illuminate kind of like how people brought this grape along chronologically. So
I wanted to make a comment about the tasting experience with this wine. It's quite young and tight. So we just double aerated it and tried it again, and it brought out quite a bit more nuance in the upfront fruit. It also brought out more tannins in the finish, and you called it a medium finish, but the finish was a little bit longer. The tannins are not unpleasant, they're soft tannins, but it brought out more nuance with the aeration did.
Yeah, definitely. I think for Zinfandel, not usually a grape that's known for lots of tannins, whereas Primitivos and like some of the Tribodrag and some of these like these older world variations definitely have tannins. So only air will always be your friend in some of these cases where it's gonna loosen up the wine a little bit and bring out more of those kind of softer flavors.
But you bring up a good point, and I remember we talked about this in a previous tasting about treatment of some of these wines, especially those that are wound up, pretty tight or, need some space to air. And no, point well taken.
Sorry, T, you're about to say something, I think.
Yeah, I also think too, like the way a winemaking plays into it. In the old world, you usually, like in Puglia in Italy, you're always having wine with food. So the way the winemaker is gonna make the Primitivo is they're gonna want a little tannins on it because you're gonna have it with like say a bolognese or pasta sauce. Versus in the new world, sometimes after work you just want a glass of Zinfandel, which is on its own, which is kind of a cocktail wine, right? You just have it on its own. It's perfect on its own. It's juicy, it's plush, it's round. You don't, it's very enjoyable. And I think that's also a factor in how these grapes manifest themselves in different regions.
Yeah, and that just speaks to like intentionality with the grape, where like you said, like what the winemaker wants to do with it. It goes well before the winemaking in the cellar. Like we were talking about with Cinsault, where it's a blending grape, where the intention was to use it for a certain piece of like the symphony or the art or whatever you want to call it, the final piece. That was how it was situated in the vineyard. That's they were farming in a certain way. If they know in the south of France, they're saying, "Oh man, I really have trouble getting color and acidity in my wines because I have over ripeness problems or whatever." I'll plant this, and so I'm going to harvest it early, and so to get that retains good color, but it has a lot of acidity. Again, someone might taste those cinsaults and from southern France to go, "Wow, these wines are all really like very sharp and thin and just kind of dark and kind of weird." And so they relegate it to blending grape status. And again, it just speaks to intentionality. It's about what the winemaker wants to do with it. There's a lot of French winemakers who are like, "Yeah, you should only have my reds with food. I would never drink my Burgundy or my whatever, without a good meal." Whereas again, like you're saying, treating it like a cocktail wine, you just pop the cork and go. I think there's definitely I hate to use the word some assembly required, but like sometimes that is kind of the case with some of these wines. They do want air, and a lot of reds will show better.
Good things take
some.
effort.
Can you comment on the age worthiness of the Primitivo?
I would say a good. I mean, I think it's drinking really nicely right now. But I do think that it could definitely be something that's a good 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years.
Right.
It depends on how you like to drink your wines.
Right.
Really, that's also part of the question. I'm not someone who loves the way that Zinfandel Primitivo ages a lot, because I love the bright freshness, like the spice and the verve of a young one. I think this one could definitely age for a year or two and still be, really definitely improving from my palate. But once they get over like the 8, 9, 10, 12 to 15 years, sometimes the brown sugar starts coming in. You start getting some more of that raisin-aged sort of flavors, the dried fruit. And for me, for my palate, I don't love that. But for somebody else, they love that.
Absolutely.
So there's nothing. There's definitely some variability there.
Well, that's the Zinfandel split with it too, right? Because if you have a heavily oaked Zinfandel and you've got you've got tannins coming in, then your aging potential is different.
Yes.
You're going for a very different different thing. So in this case, I think this is I agree. I think it's tasting.
I would say like 3
I'd
to
say
7
4 to
years is kind
6
of my window.
years. Yeah.
Mhm.
On this, I mean, if you wanted to age it, yeah. Because then the
And after that,
tannins can soften it.
bricky and kind of falling apart, probably.
Yeah. No, it's there's definitely like kind of aging and cellaring wines is an art, not a science, and it's something that there's like one person's perfect and another person's broken. I've tasted wines that people were, oohing and awing about, and they were saying, "Oh, this is so amazing." And I tasted it, I'm like, "This is oxidized garbage. Like, it absolutely is terrible." And people are losing their minds over it. And vice versa. There's been wines that I've loved that people have tasted, like, "I don't get it. This wine's terrible." So there's some subjectivity there. But if you like your wines, if this seems tight to you, I would definitely, consider this a wine that I would lie down for at least another year, if not 2 to 3 years.
Or aerate like you did and let it open up. I think that's the call right there. Because I agree. We opened this up, and some of these are naturally chilled by way of being in my freezing garage, because we're in Benicia, California right now. And sunny California is not so sunny. But I think opening up and a little bit of air.
Giving a lot of air, beat it up a little bit, pour it between a bottle, from the bottle to the decanter and back, switch it around. There have been many times when I was at a tasting appointment buying wines, and I mean, this is like a little, like, I don't know, it was always like a little, not exactly proper, shall we say. And a rep would be showing me a wine, and I would say, "Hey, can I like, aerate the wine a little bit?" And they'd say, "Oh yeah." They probably assumed that I was gonna go get a aerator, and I would just, put the cork in and just give it a shake.
Yeah.
And they always knew what I was doing. But like, there's always a look of like, oh yeah, I guess it is kind of tight. Or within like whites that were just bottled, they can be really sulfury. I mean, like, I had a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc that I'll never forget that smelled like a fart. It was just the sulfuriest, horrible thing. And I remember just taking it, and I was like, "I'm doing you a favor, man." And I shook it up, and I poured it. He's like, "Wow, that's much better than the first two appointments I took it to." So
Or if it's lazy or unfined, yeah. I mean,
Oh yeah. I wouldn't do it with something that has like lots of like unfined kind of chunks kind of float around it, because it'll just snow globe it. But I there definitely is something to be said about getting some wine, some air into the wine, and it'll show better. Yeah.
Well, we get
These
only
are tricks
3
of the
wines.
trade. These are tricks of the trade here. We don't share these.
That's right.
Yeah,
Behind the scenes, yeah. We've only got these 3 wines. Normally we have our bonus wines, but we can maybe open it up. T, you sorry, buddy. I cut
Oh,
you off.
sorry. I was gonna say the 2 tricks that you might have heard that you should never use is blender. This was
Yeah.
an old wives' tale, like that you can throw it in a blender as an aerator. That messes up the wine. You're better putting it into a pitcher.
I
Like,
disagree. I've done it and it is fabulous.
oh really?
Oh, you did really? Okay.
I
She
mean,
does
so
it all the time.
no, because I get home from work very late and I'm like, oh my God, I have to be at wine tasting. I didn't have time to decant my wine. I throw it in there and I don't tell anybody what I did and everyone loves the wine. And then I say what I did and half the people look at me like I just murdered a baby and everyone else is like, oh my God, you're a genius. So it works actually.
Oh,
I'm also
really?
gonna
Okay,
step
I
in-
should-
I'm gonna
I
step
should
in
do
and
it.
defend you on that. I've done worse as far as like if we're having now a sort of like open moment of confession. I put white wine into a Soda Stream, and I'm gonna tell you.
I mean, that's a little different, Dana, but no, but
Well,
I
You can
A
turn.
friend
you
of
can
mine
turn-
and one of the guys in our wine group, he owns the wine shop. Him and I both have our coffee frothers. And we just were like, okay, this needs a little, we're like,
Oh, with like a small little. That's a good idea. That's
yeah,
a-
like
that-
little,
that's-
like the coffee frother.
I would
If you
say
can't blend it, just bring a blender with you with your little.
As long as you don't frappe it, right? Yeah.
I would say
Right.
my biggest concern with the blender is that it's not entirely clean. Like I've seen a lot. I've used a lot of people's blenders.
That's some grease.
Well, this is
I-
my
yes,
foam
yeah.
blender and you only put it in there for like 15 seconds, but it
Yeah.
totally,
No, I think mechanically, I'm like, okay, I don't see why that wouldn't work.
Sure.
Nothing different from just shaking it up a lot when you think about how the wine is. But yeah, that my concern if I was doing that at somebody else's place, I'd be like, I don't know how clean this blender
As
is.
somebody who only barely passed their food safety certificate at Solano Cellars, I can say that you don't want to use my blender. Your blender, I'm sure, is a lot cleaner than
I'll
my
keep
blender.
that in mind.
I'm just saying, like, that's my confession. I had no time. I was crunched. I looked around my kitchen. I said,
I
okay,
love
that'll
it.
work.
I love
And-
it. I think it's great.
Everyone loved it until I told them what I did. And then like, it was like 50% down the line. People were impressed or they were just appalled.
Tell me, did you serve it in the blender carafe though? That's
No, I didn't. I
Oh,
actually
no?
poured it back. I poured it back into the bottle.
That's classy.
Well, I think it speaks to like the fact that wine is something that you don't have to be too pretentious about to enjoy. One of the things that I actually really liked when I was tasting this wine, the Cinsault, was it kind of reminded me of a wine that I made in my backyard this year with Dana and T and a couple other of our friends, and I was like, hey. It's kind of just stomped up grapes if you actually really think about it. And I was like, well, duh, Ryan. Like I know how wine's made, obviously, but it's one of those things that when I tasted that wine a few months out, a couple weeks ago, I was like, this actually tastes pretty good. And I was like, okay, yeah, there's someone who would taste my wine and go, oh, that's so much better than any of these other wines. And so all this is to say there's subjectivity. There's no real wrong ways to do it, and drink what you like. And if it works for you, absolutely enjoy it and drink it. And I think, like some of the strongest opinions in wine, I find more comical than anything really. And dogma is something that we look at 8,000 years of wine history. They used to, the people look at like the Romans and the Greeks as these kind of like pinnacles of like the right way to do certain things. Like they were adding in all kinds of stuff to their wines, and so this is all kind of to say that enjoy your wines, and like that's the most important part, is however you're doing it.
Sawdust. They added
Hey.
sawdust to their wines. The Romans did. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
don't-
great. Yeah, the tannin you're tasting there is actual sawdust. In those cases, no.
I mean, the
Yeah.
classic
Sure.
example is until maybe the late, 1800s, most champagne was semi-sweet. People used to think bubbles in wines was a flaw, so.
Yeah, it was also red too. It was like
Yeah.
lightly red. They
It's like-
make like light pink champagne, like not rosé, but like a very, very light red was this kind of like partridge eye, oeil de perdrix kind of style that was also very popular from Champagne. So, you know, sometimes when you read about like, oh, King so-and-so likes Champagne, they were not talking about, you know, they're not talking about Veuve Clicquot.
In a horn. I mean, yeah, sir. No, I mean, it's like music, right? You're pushing the boundaries, you're experimenting, figuring out what works, and sometimes coming up, you know, with gold, and sometimes coming up with Blanc.
Yeah.
And, yeah. Well, this is
Well,
so.
yeah, as
I
I think Andy
have a-
started to say. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you guys off.
Not at all.
I had a question, it's sort of tangential, but building on the discussion about Zinfandel clones. I was trying to do some research on what exactly a clone is versus a different grape variety. And the best I could find, and I don't have a biology background, so this is sort of me interpreting information in a way that could be inaccurate, but is that most of the companies that test for grape varieties only test a very small portion of the grape's genome. And it's that portion that determines whether it's Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot, et cetera, et cetera. But when you talk about different clones, you're basically saying that that portion of the genome is the same, but that other parts of the genome are presumably different. And if you think about a mutation, right, that is a genetic change. So it's not that the clones do have different genetics if you're looking at the whole genome, but the portion that they're using to determine the grape variety is the same. Is that an accurate understanding, or am I totally off
Yeah.
base?
You're spot on.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. Again, not a biology background here.
But it's Mendel squares, right? I mean,
Right.
You're talking about percentages, and you're talking about I mean, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean
No, absolutely. I mean, like it's quite spot on. I mean, really, like let's say like to make it a way that like someone myself can understand, like who does not have a biology background. Like you said, genetically can be very, very similar material, but also the phenological expression is different. So, you know, you have Pinot Noir clones like Dijon clone or 777 or Vadensville or the Swan clone.
Can
Yeah,
I- can
Pomard
I,
clone.
Hop in, because I do have a biology background.
Hey,
Marvelous,
all right,
yes.
fantastic.
Perfect. Okay. So the way to think of it is like identical twins, right? They're genetically the same, but they're different people. They act different. They kind of look different sometimes, but they are DNA identical, but different people with different expressions of who they are. So that's kind of a clone versus different types of crosses, you know, with things that have different, different genetic makeup. So these clones are the same thing, which is different expressions. So
Dominant.
that's what a clone is. So it's like, just think of like identical twins.
Yeah, but
You
having
know
said
what,
that,
that's what so that's the part I wanted to clarify, because I have heard it explained that way too. But when I was looking online, and I might have just misinterpreted this, so I mean, you have the biology background here, but what I sort of gathered is that if you were to test the whole genome of two clones, they would actually be different in some place. But it's that the portion of that genome that's being tested to determine the grape variety, Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot, is what is the same. But from what you're saying, I think maybe I misinterpreted it.
yeah, from a practical standpoint, I mean, I have a real complaint about wineries claiming to be, especially Pinot Noir wineries in California. They say, oh, we have a Pomard clone, as you said, Dijon clone, and so forth, and that yet their wines don't taste like Pomard.
They're not grown in Pinard.
So they may be genetically the same, but it's as though you took the identical twins and they grew up in two different countries. You know what I mean? The expression still depends on the terroir and the winemaker, etc. So
Yeah.
just because it says clone, it doesn't mean that the wines are going to be identical or similar.
So yeah, in medicine, we do this all the time. We do all sorts of twin studies to see, people who are identical genetically. You put them in two different locations and you see how they change. So it's a very common thing in medicine. We do twin studies all the time. So
Yeah, and again, like you can, I totally agree. Like there's like what you're saying about the Pomard, like a Pomard clone grown here does not taste like a Pomard clone grown in Pomard. Like there's a lot of other reasons and factors for this that which just highlights like how many things actually go into what makes a wine unique. There's definitely some wines. I think Pinot Noir is one of the most. Pinot Noir and Riesling are some of the most studied varieties that have so many different clones that are kind of named clones, if you will, that have different that have different I should say like champions, if you will, people who are very strongly opinionated. Like, oh no, I only use this one, I only use that one, or something like that. And so I think this is something that it can be really interesting, just partly from a wine perspective, to try some of those wines. Like again, I mentioned Swan Clone earlier. That's a clone of Pinot Noir that there's a number of vineyards that grow it, and the wines come out like very, very like almost like a light pale orange, kind of brickish red sort of color. And then they're grown in a vineyard right next to what the vineyard manager has labeled as a Dijon clone, and those come out like darker, much more kind of purpley colored, but they say they're both Pinot Noir. And again, the end results, about if we're seeking truth here, like, okay, I still maintain that wine, you can go as science as you want on the wine, but it's still an art at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's yes, there is definitely value in finding the exact origin, the parentage, the whether it's DNA or whether it's kind of like the science, the breakdown. We have a lot of people who try to do this with total acidity or different measuring organic acids and different things like that in the wines, and they try to recreate it in a lab. And there's just something not quite there sometimes.
I could spend all the time in the world getting the ingredients, mixing the exact paints that Van Gogh painted Starry Night with, right? I can have the exact same thing. I have the canvas down to, I think I could be a technological expert. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to paint Starry Night. Right?
I mean, this is, we're getting into like the more philosophical realms of wine here, where some people think it's like, I don't know, like you could even mention like the ship of Theseus, like if you took a wine and you broke it apart and you move it and you make the exact same wine somewhere else, is it the same wine?
It's more like it's more conditional, right? Like if you're talking about twins, like that NASA twin study where they took these, the two astronauts, one went up into space, they kept him there for a year, and the other, was on the base, and they looked at bone density, they looked at how did the conditions of zero gravity affect the physiological differences of these two astronauts, right? I believe one was an astronaut, and then it was his twin brother who stayed on the ground. And
Kellys.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I mean, seeing that, right? I mean, just controlling for environment, right? One of the many factors that go into something, and that's just living, right? We're talking about winemaking. We're talking about an intentional act. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just.
I think that
biology is just one thing. Yeah.
I think that the whole clone thing has become an overhyped marketing tool.
Yeah,
so if you go to a winery and they tell you this is whatever clone from France, just take it with a grain of salt. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely like when you go out in the vineyards anywhere really, and you go out with someone who has been working with the vineyard for a long time. Even if that block, they say, hey, this is our block of Pinot Noir that is this clone, it's 100% this clone. I mean, one, you see mutations in the vineyard all the time. These are varieties, especially Pinot, all the Pinot families, they tend to mutate heavily. Like that's where you got Pinot Noir, it's where you got Pinot Blanc, actually, I believe is the parent of Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir was a mutation of the white grape, if I'm remembering correctly. But anyways, the vines look different, regardless of if they're planted at the same time. You do see a lot of variation. So I totally agree. I think it's one of those things that can be maybe useful for winemakers to help differentiate, but yeah, I mean this is definitely one of those kind of controversial things in the wine world. Yeah.
This record is pressed with the same vinyl that was used to make the Beatles' "Let It Go." It's going to be a fantastic record. You're going to love it. Just turn it on.
That's kind of what it's getting at.
I
Right?
mean, really, it's just like, you're like, okay.
I mean, Darby, I really love your metaphor and analogy, and I'm totally gonna. I hope you don't mind if I steal it from you, and I will credit you. I will credit you with because that's a great explanation of clones. Because you look at a grape that's less famous, say Pais, the missionary grape, and the way it's grown in the when it was brought to Canary Islands, Listan Negro, versus the way it's in Chile, totally different, and just over time, cross-pollination, etc., creates this, unique terroir, the leaves are going to be maybe a little bit different. The budding might be a little bit different over time.
But it's still the same grape.
It's just still the same grape. And the funny thing is, Pais, I mean, it's made for communion wine. Historically, no one really cared how it would really taste. No one really took care of it in the same way, they would Pinot Noir.
Also known as the mission grape, just in case anyone's following along with their wine Bible or the Oxford Companion to Wine.
He's also plugging a future club, because we're looking at Pais as a club topic, because it's a fascinating wine, similar to kind of what we were talking about with the Debuchy, right? Like this sort of like simple grape that can do phenomenal things in the right hands in the right place.
Yeah, there's definitely people who are challenging this notion of what is a simple grape, blending grape, these types of grapes that have been used for one purpose, but that which may have guided the expression of the grape for thousands of years. But that's not to say that, like for example, in California, Zinfandel now, you see a lot of Zinfandels that are made in certain styles that are pretty distinct from a wine like this Primitivo here. That's partly due to just preference, taste, how the grapes are grown, all these sort of things, whether or not it could be the same grape. If you took a Zinfandel cutting from Sonoma and you went and planted it in Salento, what's going to be the result? I mean, there's actually some Zinfandel they're planting, I know, in southern France, which is kind of interesting.
I've heard that.
They're trying it out in southern France, but yeah, I mean, are you going to make a 16-17% alcohol grape? Like, it's or wine, I should say. No, not necessarily. It just really depends on how you handle it and how you treat it in the I guess there's the kind of and Darby, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's epigenetics, which is like at the time, present, like with you're affecting, I don't know, within present generations, if I'm correct, something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but But I'm again clearly going beyond my realm of expertise here. So
this is what this is about, is kind of pushing some boundaries.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, remember, it's just genotype and phenotype. There's your genetic identity, which is like your DNA, and then there's your phenotype, which is how you express yourself, which is why two twins are completely different. They share the same DNA, so their genotype is the same. Their phenotype is different. They're completely different people.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense. Well, I learned something today.
I did too.
Yeah, always a lot of interesting
things. Jeff, did you want to plug our upcoming?
Yeah, so we did this last year. This is a little bit of a non sequitur, but we've had a couple of those tonight, so it's okay. This is just a little bit of a plug for, just we're always trying to grow the club. It's still a small project, but we love, we love these conversations. We love having more people in the conversation, and just wanted to give you the opportunity, if anyone's interested in bringing in a new member. We did this last year, and we'll give you 10% off of your club for the year. And then also you can buy the club for somebody else for 10% off the year. So it ends up being, a pretty good deal for everybody. I'm going to put the code up after the website, on the website after the presentation tonight. So it's not live. Those of you going straight to your phones, just hold on for a second, because I haven't got a chance. It just came over work, but we are gonna do that. So if that's of interest, and we do have a special card like this that we will throw in there with the box. So if you're looking for a holiday present, Christmas present, any kind of present for the new year, definitely check that out. And then just to kind of remind those of you who did sign up for the Panhellenic Games event, which is it'll be a little bit different format. We've had a couple of questions from people like, hey, I didn't get the write-ups for this. There actually aren't write-ups for them. You're forced to rely on a sort of oral history for this, which is I'll be delivering a tour, a kind of tour of the Panhellenic sites, and Ryan and T will be walking you through the 4 wines, which are really cool wines. If you didn't get the wines and you still want to attend, we would love to have you, of course. we'll send out the Zoom link to everybody who's in the club. And then there's always, we'll do the same thing. We put this up on YouTube. So if if you decide later on, hey, I'd love to get these wines, we'll still ship them to you in January we'll ship them for free. If you still want to do that, hey, I'd like to get these wines later on, definitely reach out to us. We can do that. We have a couple people who have already done that. So we're really excited about this kind of one-time event, but it'll be a little bit more of a lecture style. We'll still go through the wines, but there's going to be a lot of kind of history, archaeology, and just storytelling that goes with that as well. So
Hey,
do you
Jeff,
have anything
can I?
to add to that?
No, exactly. I just wanted to say that part of the experimentation with this and getting this out the door is that the four of us are actually going to be going to Greece in March, and we're going to be doing the groundwork for a tour. We're going to be visiting each of these sites and laying the groundwork for some actual physical touring.
Club member tours.
Moving
Ancient wine
forward.
tours.
So check this out. This will kind of be a preview for what we're thinking, because it's a fantastic way of kind of approaching Greece, wine in Greece, and then we'll physically be there in March, and then we'll take you with us, moving forward. So stay tuned. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. And then, as always, if there's anything, again, also in addition to the Panhellenic wines, but if you want any more of these, just let us know. As always, we can ship them. And there may be a shipping date in December, possibly before the end of the year. If not, definitely in January, when the January clubs come out, we can put a thing together there. So and then we're always kind of plugging. I think most of you who are on social media already follow us, but if you're kind of new to the game and you want to get on the Instagram train, I don't know. Well, it's still a thing. You can do that. I don't know. Never know with these different
Like a
things.
fan of
So
our generation.
I guess Twitter's on the way out. I don't know. We don't have a Twitter account.
Yeah.
But,
We're not on Twitter.
yeah.
I can dance. I can do a TikTok. No, I can.
Yeah.
I can. No. Okay. No. We're not going
Once
to do
this whole
that. Sorry.
internet fad blows over.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
great. Well, yeah, I think unless there's any other questions, we'll just be wrapping up there, and we want to say thanks to everybody for
Mhm.
contributing and for joining us and for being a member and for enjoying great wines with us and enjoying history.
Always such a pleasure. Join us next
Yeah.
week. Looking forward to talking to you then. And
Yeah. And as always, just if you guys always have any questions about holiday wines or just wines for gifts, just let us know. Just send us an email, info@ancientwineguys.com, and we'll get back to you. This is a community. We're happy to help you find whatever wines you want.
Love these wines. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks to all of you. Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Happy holidays.
everybody.
night, everybody. Happy holidays.
Take care. Cheers.
Happy holidays.